All right, everybody, thank you so much for being here. First, we're going to hear from Zach Goldberg. Zach Goldberg is a writer, educator, and arts organizer from Durham, North Carolina. His debut poetry collection, I'd Rather Be Destroyed, is forthcoming from Button Poetry. Well, actually, it's published now from Button Poetry in 2024. He is the author of the chapbook XV from Nomadic Press 2020 and the winner of the 2021 Button Poetry Chapbook Contest. His work can be found or is forthcoming in Agni, Pleiades, Rhino, and elsewhere. Zach has represented Wesleyan University and Berkeley, California at various national and regional poetry slam tournaments. He is a proud co-founder of Buck Slam MN and a volunteer at Bone Shaker Books. He lives on occupied Dakota land in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Zach, I'm so happy to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Sean. And yeah, thanks writers.com for hosting this. It's really a pleasure. It's lovely to see some familiar faces in the little squares. So hi, everybody. I'm gonna do some poems. It's a blast to be here with Ollie. We just went on a little West Coast tour, and this is sort of our like culminating, wrapping up a tour together situation. Um, yeah, I'm gonna read some poems from this book. This is my book. It's called I'd Rather Be Destroyed. As Sean mentioned, it was forthcoming. It has since forthcome. It has arrived. Really happy. You can buy it if you want to and read it. I would love that if you did that. And I'm going to start with the first poem in the book. That poem is called Ninth Plague, and it borrows a line from Eduardo C. Corral, who's one of my favorite poets. I'm an Aries, which means I'd rather be destroyed than ignored. My mother loves to tell this story, how once as an infant I bit down on her breast when she raised her chin to chastise my older brother. Attention is my currency of choice, never mind its proximity to violence. I grew up wanting a reason to kick, to be kicked. I grew up believing there's a scientific explanation for everything that happens in the Bible. Pillar of salt, column of fire. I learned that an act of God can be predicted by the movements of large bodies, a simple trick of astrophysics. 3 days after the solar eclipse, my mother calls to tell me the Torah scrolls have been moved from our synagogue to a safe location. This must be the end of days. I mark the blood over my door. I brace myself to be passed over. Unseen hand that blots out first the sun and then each firstborn son. What makes my brother such a worthy offering? Can't I tempt a destroying angel? Can't I sit on the receiving end of wrath? Tremble if God forgets you. Tremble if God remembers. Darkness was the ninth plague, and then there was violence. That's a poem. That's a poem. Thanks. Much appreciated. Um, okay, I'm gonna do a weird thing now where I try to share my screen so that you can see a poem, because some of these poems in this book look weird, and I want you to be able to see what they look like as I read them. Um, Let me try to do this. Thank you, Sean, for making this possible. Excellent. So this poem is in the form of a Punnett square, which if you're not familiar or if you have not taken biology since high school, this is sort of like a little tool that is used for genetic inheritance. You have the parents, so the father across the top, the mother down the side, and then when you're working with genes, you have dominant genes and recessive genes, and this is used to determine like the probability of inheriting certain genes. Um, this poem is called Punnett Square for the Ways I Die. You can read it in any order. I'm just going to read it in the order I normally read it in, and we'll do that. So, Punnett Square for the Ways I Die. Father dominant, mother dominant. I entered the world through a red gate pried open by pure chance. In this case, a Monday in spring. In this case, both parents on their knees, working the strip of earth by the front walkway they like to call a garden, caging blueberries to defend them from the birds, each metal wire as sharp as a whistle, as sharp as blood. When two jazz musicians fall in love, it's called a ballad. When they laugh, it's called a standard. When they have a son, it's called a dirge. My parents are still in love. That is their most impressive trait. Father, recessive, mother, dominant. I'm the only 12-year-old on the ellipticals at the JCC. Mom has to stop and have a full conversation with every adult we run into. I don't have the patience to be a child, and I don't have the patience to be a child, and I'm too selfish to be a parent. The afternoon dad's flight lands is the last time I don't know his blood type. Room of 1,000 hands. Mom's frantic yelling at the woman at the intake counter. Dad's absolute and mortal guilt. I was raised here but didn't know it until years later. From the hospital bed, I see death but cannot gauge its distance. Father, dominant. Mother, recessive. Here, a country of probability. Here, an alternate universe where I am no longer afraid. If I had arrived here, I would still be sick, just a different kind. Golden light through the window, and I sneeze in flocks of starlings. Mom touts the cobalt of my irises. Dad lets me try a sip of whiskey. Here, I don't look like what I am, what's hidden in the shadow of every joke. This is how I learned to hate crowds and crave attention at the same time. I can't fall back asleep after 7 a.m. I don't smoke, but I'll take a cigarette if you've got it. Father, recessive. Mother, recessive. I sang the songs. I ate the meals. I opened every door. I walked through every possibility. They say the gene for hair loss is maternal, but based on everything I've seen, heredity is just a myth. My parents live each day with the knowledge of their own weaknesses passed down to me. When I inherit something from them, they do not in turn relinquish it. They give me a thing they still own, a cutting of their grief. I have to believe that more than one thing can be true at the same time. It's the only way I get out of here alive. Woo! Thanks. Thanks for looking at my weird screen. I appreciate that. Um, cool. Yeah, there's a lot going on in this book. It deals a lot with violence from both the perspective of a perpetrator and a victim, and a lot with how that sort of plays into my identities as a white, queer, Jewish man in America. I think that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm gonna read another one that deals a little bit more with like my background and growing up in the South. And this is a poem about my parents and about me. And this is a pantoum, so there's some repeating lines. And yeah, it's called From Here. My folks ain't from here. That's what I'd say whenever asked why my accent doesn't drip molasses thick, why vinegar and pork fat are absent from my parents' kitchen. I never asked them why my accent isn't like theirs either. We're all transplants, all absent from our parents' kitchens and mother tongues. I played Southern once, like them, but either we all translate the synagogue song or America severs our mother tongues. I played Southern one summer, spit bluegrass, wished I could forget the synagogue songs. America never was. It's a myth. Years after my parents' last road trip summer, split gas, blues, I bet they can't forget the drive south. Their thread unspools like a myth in the years since their last road trip. There's a science to it, knowing how far south to drive until a threat unspools from a question. Are you from New York? Are you a Jew? There's a silence to it, not knowing which history will silhouette the evening. Once more, the question, are you a Jew? Are you from New York? Yes. See how we speak, how we sit in history's silhouette. This evening, One more promised land lies through its teeth, and I see how it speaks, how it spits, how we don't belong. Yet everywhere we've lived, a promised land lies. Through its teeth, a shrill voice that sounds of home. What can I say? I don't belong anywhere I've ever lived. In Minnesota or California or North Carolina, if my shrill voice sounded of home, what would I say? I'm from thick-dripped molasses, vinegar and pork fat, from Brooklyn and Russia and the countries before, but my folks aren't from here. That's what I'd say. Thank you, thank you. Um, yeah. I'm gonna do a few more. Um, let's see, what can I do that's weird or that's not weird? Let's do another weird one that looks weird. How about that? Who wants to look at a weird, strange one again? All right, let me pull this up. Um, cool. This poem is called Matryoshka. If you don't know, Matryoshka is like one of those little Russian nesting dolls. Um, and the sort of conceit of this poem is that you can see mother, the word mother runs through the middle of the entire thing, and it sort of closes and opens or opens and closes. Like one of those dolls. Yeah. So I'm gonna read this poem about Russian nesting dolls. When I was very young, I remember asking my mother to show me the long scar across her abdomen. That's how your brother was born, she said. My mother was split open by doctors, and out came a son. Or so I was told. It was very confusing. The only mother I knew who could snap in half so cleanly was a toy, a matryoshka, the Russian meaning little mother. A set lived on the mantel above the fireplace. My aunt brought the dolls back from the motherland. They stacked so pleasantly together, a row of increasingly tiny figures, and all mothers. I was mesmerized by their unfolding. I'd take the largest, plump, rosy-cheeked mother in my hands and twist, and suddenly out came a small forgery, and then another mother and another. The chain of breaking open continued. Each doll split until I had mothered an entire lineage. Was this what the scar meant? My brother, a cut. Mothers say when your first is a cesarean birth, your next must be as well. My mother disagreed, so I was born without a surgeon. She was left unsplit. Final mother in the set, slight and stubborn, the gall to give birth to two sons. Mother at the end of a severed river. The dolls opened. I lined the mothers up along the mantel like a family reunion. Such violent motherhood, to look back and see the hollowed out shells that mothers made for me. So is it over now? The long act of mothering children to watch them cleave in two. Mother who is unbreakable, smallest irreducible mother formed to fit inside her own splintering mother, the thinnest bolt of lightning, mother, the head and tail, mother to both, the last mother left alive, but how mother becomes mother, 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 broken mother rebuilt, wooden mother, central to each mother, tender fracture mothers make. Memory unfolds a mother. Time is horizontal, an arrangement of mothers on the mantle, a happening which mothers every happening before it and every mother that follows. Now I begin the careful act of remothering, fitting the broken dolls around themselves, each mother deliberate in her precise container, which is itself a mother. Nothing is displaced or excessive. How clever of motherhood to be displayed in a single line before it is reshelved. Mothers live on a continuum. This is how it works. My wound becomes my mother's wound, and in return, her past becomes my story, my scar. My mother texts, I love you like a potato loves the ground. An old saying from the motherland. Admittedly, I'm lost in a dead language's idioms, but I take it to mean motherhood buries itself deep in the dirt of me. I let it grow there, hiding at my core. Mother, I'm frightened. I don't have your grace or your gratitude. I can't hold so much. Mother, I envy your ability to be so close to me without being me. I wish I could do that. Mother, I can't open and stay whole, can't give and keep a piece of myself. When I try to define motherhood, it breaks and emerges from its own belly, more concentrated and exquisite. I become a mother, and why not? Can't I snap into a song? Can't I open and reveal a smaller, sharper secret? The mother at my center. Finally, they all rest, the illusion of time dispelled. The world we inherit from our mothers is the same one we borrow from our children. Whew. Thanks, y'all. Whenever I read that, I forget that it's a long poem. So I appreciate you staying with me, and checking it out. It's one of those ones that's really fun to write, and I feel like what I tried to do in this book is come up with some weird new form stuff and just like run with it. And it's a blast, and I highly encourage just like trying that out if you're a writer and you're trying to work with forms. I think I'll only read just like a couple more and pass it off to my good pal Ollie Schminkey, who's just sitting there waiting their turn. uh um Let me think. I mean, I will say there's a lot of stuff about Judaism in this book, because that's definitely what I think and write about a lot. It's definitely not only that, but I do want to be able to read a Jewish poem or two. And specifically, this poem is very much about the experience of being a Jew in America and the idea that I don't know if y'all are familiar with the trope of dual loyalty. It's like this weird stereotype. It's an anti-Semitic stereotype essentially that like Jews are cannot be loyal to both the US and Israel, and it's like this weird thing. And also, as a person who feels like I don't want to be loyal to the US or to Israel, what does that mean for me? Um, so this poem is called Twice Contained. And just like that, another nation encircles me. I am twice contained, a Venn diagram of flags, your torch and tablet, two weapons of statehood, your crown, a bastard halo. I am a barnacle on your blue-green hull. Explain again how I parasited my host home into this abundance, how I am blamed for the rats when the rats cannot be found. My grandparents' parents doubled their prayers on the crest of migration. Each year, the border of Russia crossed their cemeteries like a harvest blade. Each synagogue, an illuminated waiting room for the twice-promised voyage. They couldn't be picky with so few choices. So when you said come, they came, beckoned by thick shoals at the bottom of a lake. There, in the shallows of a different massacre, my great-grandmother gave her name to your butcher tongue, a woman beneath a larger woman's pale torchlight. And now, don't I sit between these two sweet, poisonous mouths, spent 40 years in the desert confusing your countries for covenants, though, in truth, I am neither convert nor congregant, a citizen not of one continent, a colonizer then, twice over. When you say God, you mean government. You mean ground stolen and then stolen. But no named land will grow my brand of briar, so now I belong to both culprit and casualty. Now I'm blessed with two shadows, their hands dipped in empire. Pardon me, are these both nations? I don't believe I asked, not even for one. So that's how I'm feeling about the world right now. I'm gonna do one final poem. That's hopefully a little more uplifting and lovely. Um, this is I wrote this during COVID when we couldn't meet up with anybody, but my family had a little Passover Seder over Zoom, which was beautiful. And I love Passover is just ripe with images and weird weird mythical meaning. So this poem is called Next Year in Jerusalem. When we sing the prayer after the meal, we use the melody I learned in childhood. That way, I won't get lost in the dead language, the wrong legends, old keys to a new map. Where is Jerusalem today, and where will it be next year? If I cannot hold my mother's hand tonight, then am I part of the diaspora? If I cannot welcome my father into my home, then do I live in exile. Home is where the hurt stops, where the army halts, unweaponed, edgeless as my grandmother's many scripted tongue. We've never been, but we're always on our way. Only the road that once led there is a border now, a wall, a window I look through to see the nation of your faces. So wherever we raise a glass of wine across the table, that is where I'm from, where I'm going. There will be enough Jerusalem there in the late summer mint. Jerusalem, a door I unlock with the key you hid in the hollow stone, holy city of my mother's laugh, as it Jerusalem's the dining room, home, the place you leave to find, the place you leave blood to avoid bloodshed. Next year we'll be together there. I promise. There's no place like it. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate y'all being here. Thanks again, Sean, writers.com, Ollie. Yeah, this was so fun, and I can't wait to hear Ollie's poems.
Zach, thank you so much. That was really, really wonderful. This is essentially my first time engaging with your work, but certainly won't be the last. I love your mind when it comes to form poetry. I think that the Punnett Square and the Matryoshka doll like are so smart. The way that you wrote them were so smart, and I'm so impressed with the Matryoshka in particular. I mean, you use the mother so much, but it's never like dull or annoying, and the line breaks all make sense. Like it's a really, just reading it, I was like, God, that must have been so hard to put together. Thank you so much. In the chat, everybody, I am putting Zach's website, his Instagram, and a link to buy his book, which hopefully this reading encouraged you to do. I certainly will be. And we'll have, again, time for Q&A at the end of this. I'm going to introduce our other reader now, Ollie Schminkey. Ollie Schminkey is a non-binary transgender poet, artist, and organizer living in St. Paul, Minnesota. They have spent the past decade coaching, mentoring, teaching classes, and running workshops for poets, including at writers.com. They are the author of 3 chapbooks, as well as 2 full-length collections, Dead Dad Jokes, Button Poetry 2021, which was shortlisted for both the Midwest Independent Publishers Association and the Eric Hoffer Grand Prize, and Where I Dry the Flowers, Button Poetry June 2024. Their work has been featured everywhere from poets.org to Frontier Poetry to Upworthy. When they're not writing and performing poetry, they spend their time making creepy and cute pottery under the name Sick Kitty Ceramics. You can find them touring nationally, making music, or playing with their cat Pete, who is always trying to eat things he shouldn't. Same. To take a class or to see more of their work, check out ollieschminkey.com. I have known about Ollie Schminkey's work since I was a sad little teenager and needed button poetry to save my life. And so it's surreal to be introducing them. I'm so stoked to be able to do so. Ollie, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Sean. Thank you. Thanks for everybody for coming out. Love to see these old faces. Love to see these new faces. Let's read some poems. I'm gonna kick it off with a poem from my first book, Dead Dad Jokes. Spoiler, my dad does die in the collection, and he does stay dead throughout the entirety of the collection. So we're gonna be talking a lot about death today. This book is also funny. Do I have any funny poems for you today? I don't think so, because performing funny work over Zoom is like, it just sucks your soul right out of your mouth. But just trust me, there's some funny poems in here too, if you want to read them at some point. All right, so this is the first poem of Dead Dad Jokes. My dad died a week ago, and I search for a hawk. I test my gut. I kissed the top of his urn like I kissed his dead forehead in the moment after. The feeling of his skin under my lips, chalked with cooling sweat. I stand in the middle of a field and pretend to pray. I chicken out halfway to belief. I reach out my arms and pretend I can feel energy pulsing in the wheat stalks. I read my horoscope and go back to work. My sister and I listen to the voicemails he left us while we drive to the restaurant. We listen to the voicemails he left us. I hear him in the crackle and the static. His funeral flowers have barely begun to wilt. That must be a sign. There's a storm flashing low in the distance. That must be a sign. The wind on the back of my neck is warm, and it must be a sign. I touch the soft belly of a raspberry, and it feels just like his lower lip, as I fed him his pills one by one just a few days before. I pluck each berry, place them in my bucket, and each becomes a new mouth, a gallon's worth of him dying again and again. I pick raspberries and smell the breeze and wait for a sign. There is a spider, just like there has been a spider every day, nestled in between the brambles, hanging from the side mirror of his old SUV, dangling in front of my face on the car ride home. I make believe my father is sending me spiders. I make believe. Cremation doesn't actually produce ash. Instead, the skin and muscle burn away entirely, leaving just the weakened skeleton, which is thrown into a blender, crushed, and returned to you. My father becomes the margarita I want to order at the bar. My father becomes snow. After he died, the summer was gone, and now all I can do is wait. I walk into his room and fold up his glasses. They creak like they are still expecting a face. His mother brings me a photograph of him as a teenager, and his mouth is open, wide with laughter, and I am the one who doesn't exist. Thanks, everybody. Um, cool. Now we're gonna hop over to this book. He's still dead. I just feel like my first book is because my dad died when I was 24 and I was one of his primary caretakers. And I think when you're going through something that traumatic that young, I don't know, it's very interesting to look back at. That book is like a snapshot of where I was in life. Well, this is a terrible intro. Yeah, it sucked. It sucked. And so I feel like my second book is a lot more about healing. My first book is a little bit more about anger. Let's read another poem. All right. So I never get to read this poem, so I'm gonna read it for you now. I'm super excited. It's almost a crown of sonnets, but it doesn't do the thing that a crown of sonnets does, where you have the first line and the last line matching. We're not doing that. So it's just sonnets. I'm from the Midwest, so I say plague. Okay, so just prepare yourself. This is a poem about the plagues. Okay. So we're done. Is that yeah? Okay. All right. I've been told. Okay, so just prepare yourself. The months after my father's death in 10 plagues. Sonnets. 1, water turned to blood. 2, frogs. 3, lice. It is the 30th of August, and all of the water glasses hum with the vibrations of the breath cutting his throat. The coffee on our hands darkens as we crowd around his skin. I send emails and use words like bereavement, but when I wipe at my cheek, my palm still comes away smeared crimson with this debut miracle. Abundantly they came, wisps of his hair in my mixing bowl. Nothing was itself ever again. My morning omelet, spliced with legs, the grief kicking my teeth to swim. My fingers scratching through little white flecks of his burnt body. A father, a feast. 4, flies. 5, livestock. 6, boils. 2 weeks of the deer next to the pole barn. Flies swarm through its mouth like Tuesday's shotgun in reverse. A firework of wings. His ash in my room, my studio, his hair in my car, orbed in glass, snow globe of my grief. Once I tore the flight from a fly's back. Now wings blizzard around my face while I sleep. 5 months in, but I still see the body fall behind my eyes. Buckling legs, the quake, the meat of it. I still do not have a father. Yesterday's butcher sends me a card. It's almost his birthday after all. I imagine each fingerprint bubbling up, rising through the skin like foaming yeast. 7, hail. 8, locusts. 9, darkness. It is still winter, although it is March. I hate my friends so much more than I miss him. They laugh and grief pebbles in my hands. A penny, a golf ball, my grief cracks their windshield, glass spidering until it bursts. I shove shards into my pockets like old photographs, his smile cut against my palms. They ate the fingers off of all of my friends, chewed off the corners of my dollar bills, gnawed their way straight through my front door until everything was a window to somewhere else, alone but the noise, good God, noise. Birds thrashed their bodies against my windows. The sun fell into the mouth of the beast. 10. Death of a firstborn. Even the animals, God said, even the sheep lost the first. Even the locusts and the flies, even the lice and the frogs watched a face like theirs shrivel into dust. The blood dripped from the doorframe of my love, half a decade slaughtered for the wrong God. My father, embered to the size of shoebox. I wonder if it would have been so hard if this was not the first man who had died in my hands, my first dead, who crawled back from this life into some other place. Either way, a mother weeps through the air. It does not matter whose. God licks the tips of his fingers. A dead father, a feast. Thanks, everybody. Here's another one. Oh, this poem, I wanted to read this poem because if you've ever taken a class with me, you know that when you are writing, I'm also writing. And so this poem I wrote during a writers.com class. So this is not the first draft of it, but it's the draft that is in this book. It was never enough. I had just barely begun to learn how to love him as his body shrank into the borrowed hospital bed. Everything was on loan those days, except my grudge, which I clutched between my fingers like a bird in a cat's jaw. I tried to love him like that, one finger curled around the throat of my childhood and the rest around his neck. Then I started to know him. Only inside conversations, yes or no questions, the commercial breaks. Do you need some more morphine? Doesn't that egg salad they're making look like shit? And somehow, in between all of that nothing, grew something. Once I laughed, genuinely, from my belly, and a little bit of my anger flew up through my mouth. Once, towards those last days, he was sitting on the couch blowing snot out of his nose like a child, and I ran with a tissue to hold it under his nose as he blew, to wipe his cheeks and chin, and love was created there somehow. To be tender with a father who had never been tender, to be quiet with a father who had never been quiet, to kiss a forehead that had never been kissed. And so, from around the dead bird of my hurt, I had no choice but to unwrap my fingers one by one, because I couldn't hold both my hurt and his hand. Thanks, everybody. Let's see. All right, I've got 3 more poems for you. I could just read you the whole book, but I'm not gonna. All right, so this next poem coming up, it's called a contrapunto. I'll share my screen with you for a second. Yeah, contrapuntals are my absolute favorite thing in the entire world. All right. So a contrapunto looks like this. We've got 2 columns there. What's going to happen is that this left-hand column is a poem, this right-hand column is a poem, and then we're going to create a magical third poem as we read across, right? So that's what's going to happen. This is a poem I'm reading. I'll leave it up. Maybe I'll read it and then we'll scroll along together. So you can read it too if you want to. So the left-hand side is alive, the right-hand side is dead. Alive. He walks through the trees, the sun sifting through his beard. Here I am just a kid, a father with his favorite child. He looks so much like a dad. Here we are, birds flying, a pulsing river, a ravenous picnic, and that smile, a mouth wide open, his child newly awakened, wrapped around his neck like rosary beads clinging to his body. I loved him long before I learned of his body failing, and I held him so trusting that my love is enough. Dead. My dreams every night turn to spiders that all have his face. There's a campfire burning out, and me, the white dust of only ash in my hands. In the real world, standing next to his bed again, he doesn't look like a body about to burn to pieces. Wow, I changed this. This is an older draft. That's okay, it still works. Dead silence, no voice, only an echo not quite gone yet. The pills are down his throat, the morphine into his stomach, his body only for the disease. The wound across his back becomes filled with blood, and me standing next to the body. Grief has hands twisted, tightening in prayer, the last breath like a final amen. I could speak the prayer 1,000 ways. Still, God will answer for only God, never for the living. He walks through my dreams every night. The trees turn to spiders that all have his face. There, the sun is a campfire burning out, and me sifting through the white dust of his beard, only ash in my hands. Here, in the real world, I'm standing next to his bed, just a kid again. He doesn't look like a father with a body about to burn his favorite child to pieces. He looks dead. So much silence. No voice, only an echo like a dad not quite gone yet. Here we are. The pills are birds flying down his throat, the morphine a pulsing river into his stomach, his body a ravenous picnic only for the disease, and that smile, the wound across his back becomes a mouth wide open, filled with blood, and me, his child, standing next to the body. Newly awakened grief has hands wrapped around his neck, twisted like rosary beads tightening in prayer, clinging to the last breath, his body like a final amen. I loved him long before I could speak. I learned the prayer of his body failing 1,000 ways, and I held him so still, trusting that God will answer for my love. Only God is never enough for the living. Thanks, everybody. Okay, I just realized at this point I have 2 more poems left, but I realized I only read dad poems. I write about other stuff as well. So I'm gonna read you one poem that's about literally anything else. Um, I love it. All right, we're gonna read this one. And then I'm gonna set you down on then think about if you want to get set down on a super bummer note or a little less, but still a bummer note. Okay, those are your 2 choices. All right, think about it. All right. Robert Frost would have been a camping gay. The sunset is a feral orange. The berries puckered against the tree line like our fresh-picked acne scabs. If nature was anything, they'd have to be trans. How many times have we all lost ourselves in the woods and emerged as someone worthy of a new name? All hail the camping gaze, the salty pink of our corneas as we blink through the fall wind. All hail the dildo stashed in the glove box like a gun, the teeming black of the asphalt as we rush towards a clean lake, the waves drinking our bodies up like a body of water is in fact a queer body, hungry for our touch. I'm in love with all the trees, and I think they love me back. I think a river is the gayest shit ever. The frogs cheer me on from the banks. Smoke from the fire is a deep, translucent blessing, reminding me that we deserve to be here too. We deserve to be here too. We deserve to be here too. We deserve to laugh, flinging ourselves into water. We are not just built for shame and fear and waiting our turn. This world is ours too. And if God did not make us in his image, we'll just have to make God in ours. All right, thanks everybody. Okay, you have a third option. You can be mega bummer, medium bummer, or less of a bummer. I know I added a third option. All right, we'll do 1 is for mega bummer, 2 is for medium bummer, 3 is for less bummer. All right, your voting begins. 3, 2, 1, vote. Bummer. That's I've seen the most mega bummer. I love this. I love this. All right. We're gonna end on a mega bummer. Unless I messed up my scale and led you all astray. All right. So this is a poem about forgiveness. And this is like one of my favorite poems in the book. So we'll end with it. It's called Forgiveness. I never said it out loud. Maybe my father wanted forgiveness as much as I wanted an apology, but we stayed silent, the grudge smooth as a pearl underneath our tongues. But it doesn't mean I didn't forgive him. And it doesn't mean he wasn't sorry. The last bit of his life pinched between the fingers like a kerchief or a white flag. I was there, wasn't I? And he never asked about a boy again, not during those last days. We had sanded our hurt down to the bare wood, and we pretended at love with our best effort, trembling the whole first week I brushed his hair, until maybe we had gotten it at the end. He invited my partner camping. He would die before, but still. It was not the three-part apology meme shared on Facebook circa 2013. It was not an atonement. There was no action plan for restorative accountability. Instead, we both agreed silently that we would pretend he had always accepted me, and in return, he would die. We struck this bargain without realizing it, my hands deep in the rattle of sorting his pills. We decided it over dice poker, the tips of his fingers already purpling. We made a pact while I took off and put on his socks, while I rebandaged his sores, while I cooked him grilled cheese like a mother and tucked him into bed. I kissed him on his forehead every night. What more forgiveness could he have possibly asked for? I was there, shuffling inches behind his every step in case he fell, washing the puke bucket in the sink, rubbing lotion on his feet. When he offered me his death as an apology, I took it. Of course, I took it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much to writers.com for having us. Give it up one more time for Zach Goldberg. All right, Sean, I'm gonna pass it back to you.
Ollie, thank you so, so much. That was really, really beautiful. I'm struck by you have a lot of like recurring imagery in your work. Some of the images that come to mind are hands, spiders. If you're scared of spiders, I am too, by the way. You ash came up a lot, and blood, woods, and trees. You know, those images came up a lot, but every poem felt so distinct and unique, and a different piece of life was refracted through it. I also wrote down the line, I couldn't hold both my hurt and his hand because that absolutely sent me. Um, Really, really beautiful stuff. Let me in the chat put for you all a number of links. So I'm gonna send it in 3 messages because Ollie's kind of doing everything apparently. So first I'm gonna put in Ollie's Instagram, Facebook, and of course a link to their book, which that link looks messed up. So give me just a second because I've clearly messed something up. Hold on. Button poetry, where I draw the flowers. Okay. Here is a link to Ollie's book. If you were moved like I was, or even if you weren't, go buy it. Here are some classes that Ollie is teaching. So Ollie has a class coming up with Button University that's on November 3rd. And then Ollie has 2 classes coming up with writers.com. The first is called Mastering the Manuscript. If you want to make progress on a poetry manuscript, take that class. It's beginning on February 5th, 2025. And then Ollie also has a class called 30 Poems in 30 Days, where you will write a poem a day for 30 days in April, which is NaPoWriMo. That begins on April 1st. Is that the class that you wrote your poem in, by the way? The one that you said that you wrote with us?
Yeah, actually, no. I wrote it in my intro course in my Italian.
Oh.
Yeah.
Cool, cool. And finally, Ollie has a couple of readings coming up. The first is a reading with Neil Hilborn. The link to that is in the chat that I'm sending. You'll find it on Facebook. And then this coming Sunday, that's October 27th at 5 p.m. Central, Ollie's reading with Neil Hilborn at a show at Ice House in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We have a few minutes left, so I want to invite all of you to ask questions. We are recording this, so if you don't want your face to show up on recording, feel free to send your question in the chat and I will read it for you. While you are thinking of questions, I'll ask the first one. I'm curious for both of you, since you are, I don't want to say you're primarily slam poets, but Ollie, you certainly got your start in slam. It might be the same for you, Zach. I'm curious to know if your slam backgrounds inform your approach to writing poetry on the page, or if they're like entirely different processes, like what's kind of the relationship between these two different sides of your poetic selves?
I love this question. Zach, do you want to talk first or second?
You're already talking.
Okay, I'll be talking then. Um, yeah, I think slam is awesome. I've been saying a lot lately, that people don't think that they like slam, but everybody likes slam. What people don't like is bad slam. But everybody likes slam. I in all of my classes that I teach, I never tell people that we're going to be looking at spoken word, and then I always make them look at spoken word because I think there's this perception in the like academic poetry community that like spoken word is bad or that we don't have anything to learn from spoken word. And I think that academic poets are mean. And that they should consider their audiences, and who their poetry is for. And I like to write poetry that's for everybody. That came off so judgmental. I'm way nicer when I'm having this conversation in my classes, when I'm encouraging people to think about their audience. Um, but yeah, so I think slam really informs the way that I write. I think in slam tradition and spoken word poetry, I was taught so much to consider the audience because you get that direct audience feedback. And so in my own work, like I think poetry can be a beautiful tool for processing. And I think very deeply about what the audience or the reader is going to get out of my poem before I publish it or before I perform it. Because if the poem is just for me at that point, I'm like, okay, well then why share? Right? So that's one of the biggest things that I have taken away from slam is considering the audience. I also feel like I never put this in my bio, but I like have a creative writing degree. I went to McAllister. I went to a great school, got a creative writing degree. All of the important things that I learned about writing, I learned from slam poets. No offense to the wonderful professors at McAllister, but there is something to be said about like I was on a lot of different poetry teams that competed at all of these national competitions. I've been on like 8 of them. I've been on a ton. Um, and the thing that's so cool about being on a team is that if your poem sucks, your team loses. So everyone on your team is deeply invested in your work being good. So if you want an honest edit, go be on a slam team because they want your poem to be good so that you can win. All right, this is a chaotic answer. Zach, say something beautiful.
No, I mean I agree with most of what you said. I think I'm less salty about academic poets, but that's fair. Um, yeah, I also came from spoken word initially when I was a teenager. And I agree with sort of the idea of like thinking about the audience and getting that immediate feedback is very important. I also was thinking a little bit about like slam is a form, like spoken word is a form, and like if you're writing for slam you're trying to like fit the confines of this limitation of this form. And actually I think like Danez Smith has said stuff about this because they started as a slam poet, right, and like now they're maybe one of the most successful poets writing right now. um and just the idea that like no, it's very good to learn to write under limitations. I think that's what a thing that creates interesting poetry and interesting work is, to be like, oh, this has to be 3 minutes long and this has to actually like an audience has to hear it one time and understand what I'm saying. Like that is a specific way to write, and I think that's really important and valuable. And definitely it has influenced my work.
Thank you. I'll add that it also makes you just a better reader even when you're on Zoom. I mean, we've never had this issue at writers.com, but I can't tell you how many poetry readings I've been to where I didn't keep my eyes open. I shouldn't say that on a recording, but I said it anyway. Questions from the audience. Yeah, please use the raise your hand feature, or if you don't want to be on recording, please send your question in the chat and I'll read it for you. Joyce, go ahead.
Hi, thank you to both of you and Sean for hosting. Very inspirational, all the different poems. For Ollie, reading about your dad's experience, brings back my experience with my dad. So there were a lot of spiritual connection that I'm kind of like, oh, dying to write that. But it also brings back some so-called mundane experience that, I went through, like the aftermath of the ceremony. I'm by myself, trying to organize all the wreath, like nobody's around. So I was alone, like this aloneness when everybody's gone, and I have to take care of some dead flowers. So, you know, that's I want to, make that evocative. So thank you for the inspiration. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I hope you write those poems. And I think that's so true. Like, I don't know, I'm the type of person, I love talking about grief. I think we should all talk about grief way more in our society. And the moments of grief that are so lonely and so normal. Just like I remember right after my dad died, we like went to Walmart and like bought some bananas, and like going through the Walmart checkout line with your bananas, and you just watched a person in front of your face die like an hour beforehand. Just so strange. But yeah, Joyce, write that poem. Write that poem.
Mary, go ahead.
So Ollie, amazing. And Zach, always amazing. That's all I want to say. And that we love you and are so proud of you. And unfortunately, I have to go, but I wanted to say that before we left. Just thank you so much, both of you.
Thanks, Mary Kay. Say hi to everyone.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ollie, about how we never know, what someone's going through. Like, I can't imagine being the cashier and that checkout line and checking out the bananas with someone who just saw their father die. Like, on the other side, it's also pretty insane. I also had to laugh at you talking about your pronunciation of plague. I grew up in Milwaukee, so I've got the long A symptom too. And then when I went to school in Florida and I went around calling things bags and dragons, and people were like, "What's wrong with you?" Um,
I love it. Yeah, we were the Pine City Dragons. Yeah, now you know the word VAGUE.
Mhm.
I got so teased in college for saying vague that I switched to saying nondescript.
Oh no.
And I went to college in Minnesota. So I'm like, get with the program, people. You moved here.
Honestly, my problem now, I now live in New York City where there are bagels everywhere, and I got really confused about what's a long A and a short A, and so it's bagel, right? But I just said bagel because I'm still a little bit confused about which word gets which pronunciation. Yeah,
We were just on tour and Zach was making fun of me. And I literally I can't hear the difference when it's coming out of my mouth. And so people will be like, it's bagel. And I'll be like, that is what I said.
Any other questions for Zach or Ollie, or just effusive praise, or I don't know,
So,
hate. I mean, we don't want that here, but.
so how do you pronounce vague? It's always vague to me.
I say vague.
Vague, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're saying it right, Ollie. I say
How do
vague.
I say vague?
I
Vague,
don't know
yeah.
what you're saying.
No, maybe I say vague.
Vague, vague, vague,
Now I'm confused. Now I'm confused.
vague.
Ollie, keep doing you. B, you have a question.
Yes. So I was just at Neil's thing last night. I briefly met you. Um, and you talk a lot about grief. And I actually work at the Veterinary Medical Center at the U here. And a lot of my job working at the front desk is working with grief. Like people will just walk up and start bawling because their pet is dying or just died. Um, and like, what is your experience amongst those things?
That's a great question. People send me messages all the time of all of the terrible things that have ever happened to them. Especially, I mean, like I write a lot about there's not so many of these poems online anymore, but I used to write a lot about like being a survivor of sexual assault and abuse. And so I have people in my DMs from all angles telling me every bad thing that's ever happened to them. Um, I think, I mean, like, I don't know. There are some people I think who would feel like, okay, have some boundaries, but I don't actually feel that way. I just feel really grateful that people feel like my inbox is a space where they can put something um and talk about it. I think especially like we were talking a little bit earlier, my dad died when I was 24. None of my friends had a clue. They didn't have a clue. And it was so isolating and so lonely. And grief, I think, is an inherently lonely experience in the first place. And then coupled with all of this stuff of like me having to do these things for my father that most people don't have to do until they're in their 50s and 60s, right?
Yeah.
And so I felt really alone. And so one of the things that I really wanted to do with Dead Dad Jokes and with my second book, Where I Dry the Flowers, is to have all of these honest conversations about death and to bring that conversation more into public. You should talk about death with your friends. You know what I mean? Like
Oh
this
yeah.
is this is a little bit of activism, but like if you don't have directives, have a healthcare directive. You're never too young to have a healthcare directive. You're never too young to talk with your family about what you want them to do with your body when you die. I was lucky enough to have learned about that and had all of those conversations with my dad before he died. And I'm the one who filled out his healthcare directive while he dictated it to me because he was too weak to write.
Yeah.
And without having those conversations, like it would have been so much worse. So a long way to answer your question. I love it when people tell me about their dead people. Although it's always hard to feel like you are like offering enough in exchange, you know, especially because we're not taught how to talk about grief. And even though I've been through a lot of grief, I don't always get it right. But if you take away one thing, if someone in your life is grieving, saying something is always better than saying nothing. And going there
Absolutely.
and trying and doing the wrong thing, at least in my experience, doing the wrong thing is better than doing nothing because doing nothing makes people feel like you don't care.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree.
I read this really I read really that it's relevant. I read this article yesterday in The Guardian, and I'm actually going to link it into the chat if it interests anybody, about how like our ideas of death in the West, in the modern West, is really different than how we thought about death historically. We're so kind of removed and isolated from it because we tend to live longer lives than we have in the past, and the sort of rituals we have around death have largely fallen out of fashion. And so the way that we think about it is just so not, you know, integrated into everyday day life and society, and that in a way kind of makes the grief much starker. So I just put it in the chat if it interests anybody. We're a little bit past the hour, but I see that we have a couple of things. Someone in the chat said to me, not a question, but I'm older now. I started experiencing extreme grief rather young as well, and I have really connected with Ollie's work. Thanks for sharing your work and advice. And I also see we have a question from Judith. That'll be the last question of the night. Go for it.
Hi, well, I wanted to thank Ollie and Zach so much for your incredibly powerful poems. And I just wanted to say one quick word about grief. Is really kind of a form of madness, and to have the courage to approach that form of madness, because it's so misunderstood, and I think that's why people are so afraid of it. That to put these poems and write them down is an incredible act of courage, and I say that to Zach as well because Zach, I feel like there's a grief runs through your poems as well, kind of a living grief. And I thought it was so interesting in your forms how you're almost trying to organize, compartmentalize that grief. And Ollie, you talk about your poems being morbid or sad, but they're, for the reader, they're liberating. because you allow us to hear it and all those wonderful descriptions, Zach as well, and so that we leave being lifted up in our grief, and we can carry that grief a little bit easier.
Oh, thank you so much, Judy. Oh, Zach, go ahead.
No, I mean, same thing. I feel like if my therapist heard you say that about my poems, Judith, that I tried to like organize all of my feelings in this way, he'd be like, "Ha!" Like I told, like, so like, great read. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I also really appreciate that because I feel like a lot of authors say this, but I genuinely wrote Dead Dad Jokes to be the book that I would have needed to read. And I feel like when my dad was dying and right after he died, like I really sought out media about death, and that is like the only thing that helped me to feel less alone. If you're ever interested, um, the book that helped me the most, which it's about the cremation industry and goes very detailed into what happens in cremation. So like you can draw a line, that's totally fine. But it's called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Caitlin Doty. I pronounced her name wrong for years, but I'll put that in the chat too. Great book about death and dying. Check it out if you want to.
Yeah, you had that fact in your poem that about the incineration just burns the flesh off, but then they grind out the bones. I that didn't know that, and now it's in there forever. Um, Thank you both so much. Thank you all for being here. I did not expect to have so much fun talking about grief on a Friday night, and yet that is exactly what happened. I hope you all feel the same way. Ollie, Zach, your readings were incredible. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being here on a Friday night experiencing poetry. Buy their books. I will be emailing you all with links again because you should all buy both of their books. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.